Welcome to another episode of Cardinal Conversations. This week in the kind of series of the previews and talking to people from the opposition. We're joined by Robbie Stelling of the Hartlepool Mail. You may remember him coming on last season before the game taking place, the away game, I think towards the end of last season. Kind of certainly felt like it was after Christmas. I think in that podcast we talked about if Hartlepool could make a late charge for the playoffs, if Woking could stay in the league, would they go up, would we go down? I think we came to the agreement that we would probably both be in the same league still, and here we are in the new season. So it'd be good to catch up with Robbie and get his thoughts on what's going on, a bit of a background on Hartlepool, where something always seems to be going on at the moment, and thoughts around the game on Saturday, the team, and who to look out for, and all of those various things. So thank you very much for joining us, Robbie. Pleasure to have you on as always. I guess probably that's the best place to start. Is kind of the kind of final third of last season. Obviously, Woking fans will have a bit of a vested interest. I think when we played you, Lenny Lawrence was still the first team manager with Limbrick kind of in the background. But then obviously, I think he became first team manager towards the end of the season, but then didn't make it through the summer. So maybe that's a good place to start to kind of fill people in on what's been happening.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on, Jacob. It's great to be back and to chat to you. It's been a remarkable few months at Hartlepool United, to be totally honest. Anthony Limbrick was someone that I really, really liked, a great guy, and I think a good coach as well. Obviously, someone who has aspirations to make that transition from being a coach to being an established manager. Having had a limited playing career, that can always be more difficult because you don't have so many connections in the game. But as you say, he had a spell in charge of Pools last season. He was the head coach rather than the manager. So as you say, Lenny Lawrence was in charge when the two sides last met. Lenny Lawrence replaced Darren Song in October on an interim basis. Initially, Darren Song, of course, a name that will be familiar to Woking fans as well. He was then appointed permanently in November, and Anthony Limbrick, who at the time was a coach at Peterborough, came in as a coach on the Pools coaching staff. We understood at the time that was on the assumption that Limbrick would eventually succeed Lenny Lawrence. Lenny Lawrence turned 77 in December. I think at the time he was the third oldest active manager in the world. We'd expected Lenny Lawrence to oversee the team for the rest of the campaign. As we spoke about when we chatted last season, Pools had a slight hope of challenging for the playoffs. I'm not sure that was ever really a particularly distinct possibility. They had a couple of injuries after the turn of the year. They had a couple of bad results. And all of a sudden, in late January, early February, Lawrence made the decision to step down. It was a sort of bizarre announcement. We had a 10-minute YouTube video with Lenny Lawrence updating fans on the progress of the team, various players, fitness updates, and so on and so forth. And then in sort of the last 30 seconds, he just said, "Oh, by the way, I'm standing down, and Anthony Limbrick's the new head coach." I think Limbrick certainly was pleased to take the role. His hand was forced in the sense that he had to take it at a difficult time. Pools hadn't won in 4. They actually won the first game under Limbrick. Then they had a really difficult run. I don't think they won in 8, and then they went 6 unbeaten. A lot of it was in a really difficult background off the pitch. Chairman and owner Raj Singh, who was a really controversial figure up here, first took over Pools in 2018, and given his associations with arch rivals Darlington, that was a bitter pill to swallow for many Pools fans. It just so happened that the club were in a really precarious financial situation at the time. There have been some good times and some bad times under Singh. Pools won promotion in 2021, but they were relegated again back to the National League in 2023. The last 2 years, they finished 12th and 11th. Pretty underwhelming for a club like Hartlepool, who have a proud history of being in the Football League, and the fans really expect that. They certainly expect that their team should be challenging. Singh announced his unexpected decision to resign as chairman in March, and his intention to sell the club ideally before the end of the season on May the 5th. Negotiations progressed well. One party emerged as the front runner, Herd International Group, led by a local businesswoman named Shelley Hammond. We understood that a deal was really close, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, takeover negotiations collapsed. Singh then said that he was prepared to return to his former role as chairman, but only if it was what the fans wanted. That was then put to a vote, slightly unusually, among season ticket holders. It was a contested vote. Some season ticket holders complained that they didn't receive their virtual ballot form. I think there was some controversy over what was on the ballot as well, in that it said that Singh would return or that Singh would not return and effectively allow the club to go it alone. There was potentially a third option that takeover negotiations might have been able to continue, but that wasn't necessarily included on the ballot. In the end, Singh returned, having won, if you like, 63% of the vote. And then we started to hear rumblings that Anthony Limbrick's future might be in jeopardy. Pools were rumoured to have made an approach for Boston United's Graham Coughlin. According to BBC Lincolnshire, that was rebuffed. And in the end, they decided to replace Limbrick with Simon Grayson, obviously vastly experienced manager. We might talk about him in a minute, in June. What I would say about Anthony Limbrick, the results weren't the best. As I say, Pools went 8 games without a win. They were beaten 5-1 by Rochdale on the penultimate weekend of the season, but there were some good moments. Pools beat rivals Gateshead over the Easter bank holiday and produced a really impressive performance. And you could see what Limbrick was trying to do. He was a really likable character. I really got on with him well. I thought he talked well. I loved his passion and enthusiasm for the game. I think he was just given the reins at a really, really difficult time. Personally, I would have liked to see the club stick with him over the summer, not least because he navigated such a challenging and ever-changing situation with dignity and enthusiasm. And I thought he spoke really well as the club's figurehead through a tremendously difficult time. At the back end of last season, there was a real genuine fear among Pools fans that if a takeover wasn't completed, what was going to happen to their club. And Limbrick had to deal with a lot of that while still trying to get results. So it was perhaps a little bit disappointing the way the club handled the situation, because if the rumours are to be believed, they approached Graham Coughlin while Limbrick was still in his post. But I think Anthony Limbrick is certainly a popular figure in Hartlepool, certainly for what he did off the pitch. The results never quite went his way. I think he won 5 of his 17 games in charge, something like that. So from a purely footballing perspective, you can perhaps see why Pools made the decision, but someone certainly that we like a lot up here.
Yeah, and then I guess, as you say, it was kind of all change in the summer. Obviously, off the field stuff, but the on the field stuff seems to have gone quite well. Obviously, we're a few games into the season, and results have been pretty positive so far. But was the pre-season positive? What do you make of the opening games? And I guess that always kind of built up by, what does the squad look like, and were there many kind of ins and outs over the summer which have kind of fueled this early form?
Yeah, so there tends to be a big overhaul of players at Pools. I don't think that's necessarily the way to do it if you want to establish yourself as a consistently successful team, but that was probably inevitable this summer. Pools lost probably their 2 best players over the summer. Manny Disarue, who's gone to Rochdale, scored 43 goals in 89 games, was a hugely popular talisman, and Joe Gray, one of the club's longest serving players, signed when he was just 16, made well over 100 appearances, was part of the squad that won promotion in 2021 as well. He's gone to title favourites York. So it was a big blow, but actually I think it's testament to how well Pools have recruited, that I think if you spoke to most fans now, they would say that probably the squad going into the new campaign is significantly stronger than the squad that finished last season. There have been 12 new faces. Probably the marquee signing, I suppose you would say, is Alex Reid, who had a really prolific season with Wealdstone, scored 17 goals for them last season, and obviously was signed to replace the goals lost by Manny Disarue. He scored 2 in 2. Pools beat Altrincham 2-0 on Tuesday night, and he scored the opening goal. He scored from the spot, as well as Pools beat Braintree at the weekend. He's been really impressive because he's more than just a goal scorer, much like Manny Disarue was. He's dynamic, he's a good athlete, but he's got that size and presence as well. Pools also signed Danny Johnson, a proven goal scorer in the Football League. He certainly scored plenty of goals against Pools throughout his career. Actually came through the Pools Academy, never made a first team appearance, and has now returned after 15 years. A couple of additions in midfield, but the defence is completely unrecognisable to what it was last season. Pools have made 5 defensive additions. They've also signed a new goalkeeper, which was much needed, Harvey Cartwright, who's come in on a season-long loan from Hull. And Pools have actually kept 3 successive clean sheets at the start of the season. Simon Grayson is a manager, I think, renowned for pragmatism, and I mean that in a positive sense. He likes to build on strong defensive foundations. Pools have played with a 3 at the back. The side that they fielded on Tuesday night against Altrincham contained all 5 of their new defensive additions. Rhys McNally has joined from Kidderminster. He's really impressed so far. Cameron Johns arrived on a season-long loan from York. Jay Ben has been perhaps one of the pick of the performers so far this season. He signed from Lincoln, but he's got National League experience previously. He had a good loan spell with Solihull Moors in 2023-24 in a year that Moors finished in the playoffs. And Bessa Topolage, a player who went slightly under the radar, who's played on the opposite side at left wing back to Jay Ben. He was part of the Bromley side that won promotion to the Football League a couple of years ago, and he's really impressed as well. So it's an almost entirely unrecognisable team, certainly to the one that Woking fans will be familiar with from when the two sides last met. On the season opener, when Pools travelled to Yeovil, there were 8 debutants in the starting 11 and 2 more debuts from the bench as well. And it's been pretty consistent in terms of team selection so far. There was 1 change from Saturday's win over Braintree to Tuesday's win over Altrincham. Captain Tom Parks was replaced by Maxime Coogan, who was part of the Scunthorpe side that won promotion back to the National League last season. So it's been really positive. Pools are yet to concede a goal. They've picked up 7 points from their opening 3 matches. I think the only thing that Pools fans would potentially be mindful of is they had exactly the same record at the start of last season. They kept 3 successive clean sheets. They picked up 7 points from the opening 9 games. It was all going swimmingly well, especially when Pools took a 2-goal lead against Woking on the August bank holiday weekend. And we all know what happened that day. Obviously, Woking came from 2 goals down to win 3-2 late on. But certainly there's a renewed sense of positivity after what's been a really difficult summer at Victoria Park.
Yeah, as you say, it's kind of contrasting starts to the season for the 2 teams. I'm sure that these kind of podcasts are listened to some Woking fans, obviously looking to find out what's going on with Hartlepool, but probably also Pools fans that are looking to hear kind of your thoughts on the latest goings on. But I guess for the Woking fans that are tuning in, I mean, after 3 defeats in the league and even losing in the National League Cup, I think we've only scored 2 goals. One of them was an own goal, and the other one really wasn't a well-made goal. So we're not making very many chances. So I guess if everything went to plan, it would seem like a very routine victory, but we know football doesn't work like that. So is there anything that Woking fans can hold on to, do you think, going into this game?
Well, I think probably the thing that Woking fans can hold on to is that there's no such thing as a routine win at Hartlepool United, especially since Pools were relegated back to the National League in 2023. It's felt as though the club is only a few bad results away from a crisis. Victoria Park is, or can be, certainly an incredibly hostile place for visiting teams to come. The fans are close to the pitch. They're hugely passionate. One of the bigger average attendances in the division as well. But at the same time, the fans are expectant. They've not had a lot of success over the last couple of years, and that can lend itself to considerable frustration. Pools have had a good start to this season, but as I said, Pools had a good start last year. It didn't take long for fans, when they didn't like what they were seeing under Darren Sarll, to turn on the team. And that's, relatively speaking, understandable because they have been so starved of success. I think they've been frustrated by a lack of footballing identity. They've been frustrated by the fact that the club chops and changes managers with such alarming regularity, failure of recruitment, a lack of vision, I think, a lack of a long-term plan. So there's always a sense that there is a little bit of a frustration that's still boiling away just underneath the surface. So I think that I would imagine what Woking will look to do on Saturday is try and frustrate Pools, try and make it difficult for them, certainly in the opening exchanges. And I was certainly in and around Victoria Park enough last season to know that sometimes if Pools fans don't like what they're seeing after 10 or 15 minutes, then they will let their team know about it. Pools fans expect and demand a certain type of football, and that is aggressive front foot football. They want to see, they love to see a bit of blood and thunder. They love players that give everything for the shirt. They love to see players run through brick walls, steam into tackles and challenges, but they also demand a degree of positivity. They want to see their side try and win games and take games by the scruff of the neck. So if they're not satisfied that their side are doing that within the opening 15 to 20 minutes, then I think Woking will feel as though they can certainly frustrate Pools and make it a difficult afternoon for them.
Yeah, possibly. I quite like what you said there about there just being no kind of straightforward games at Hartlepool. It kind of feels like that in the National League as a whole, doesn't it? Because it does feel like this is the league where anyone can beat anyone in theory, and there are no easy games. I know that obviously we played Carlisle on the opening weekend, and they kind of brushed us aside. And it was like, wow, this is it. The National League's going to be easy. And I think they've then drawn their next two games. And again, as you say, frustrations come out pretty quickly, because I think their fans, after kind of the excitement, I think they thought Woking were probably going to be up there. So did some of our fans. So they thought, wow, what a statement victory. It turns out we're not very good at the moment. So, and then these kind of two draws at home, and the pressure's on. And I think what we're starting to see from Woking fans, especially after the defeat last night, 2-1 at home to Wealdstone, was a lot of frustration already starting to boil over, which is crazy when you think how soon in the season we are. But one thing you were just saying about Darren Sell when he came in last season, when things turned, is August is such a long month. And it goes so quickly, but it kind of feels like not that your season can be defined in August, but it certainly feels like managers can be almost on extremely thin ice by the time you reach just the end of the first month, which must have been what happened last season.
Yeah, well, patience is not something that the football fans or decision makers at various clubs tend to be inclined to give. For what it's worth, I still think, although Woking have had a difficult start to the season, I still think they'll be just fine this season. I would imagine that the hope is that you can build on last season, obviously, and be a little bit more successful, and that's potentially where the frustration stems from. It's an interesting league, isn't it, this year, the National League? I think York are probably the obvious favourites. I think most people would agree with that. 96 points last year, missed out obviously via the playoffs. Carlisle are another team who certainly have one of the bigger budgets, obviously signed Regan Linney, who did really well at Altrincham last season, but they will have to adapt to the National League. As you were saying, Jacob, their fans are already finding out that it's a really difficult division, especially if you want to try and get out of the division, because there's only one automatic place. But one thing about the National League is it is pretty grueling in terms of the scheduling, isn't it? Obviously, the 2 games in 72 hours over the bank holiday weekend, I'm not a tremendous fan of that, not least because over the last 2 years, Pools have forfeited 2-goal leads to lose 3-2. But it does tend to mean that there are plenty of injuries. Pools have had some injuries over the bank holiday weekend in the past that have actually really derailed their season. And as with so many National League squads, you have to cut your cloth accordingly. You can't necessarily go out and recruit a huge number of players. Squads tend to be much thinner than they would be higher up the footballing pyramid, and therefore injuries tend to be much more keenly felt. I do think that it's a wide open league. I genuinely think that there's scope, and I'm not just saying this because I'm chatting to you, Jacob, for a side like Woking to potentially make a move up the division this year. I think if you look at the upper echelons, I think York, as I say, will be up there. Carlisle, despite a somewhat indifferent start, I would still imagine would be up there. Southend, who Pools play on Monday, I think last year's beaten playoff finalists, I'd expect them to do well. They've maintained the core of that squad, haven't they? And Rochdale, who are now led by Manny Disarray, a hugely popular figure here at Hartlepool United, I would think that they might be the top 4. And I think potentially Pools have a genuine claim to be best of the rest. Of course, it's easy for me to say that. Now we might be having an entirely different conversation in 4 weeks' time, because as you say, there are so many games in this opening block of fixtures. And I think Pools have actually had generally some fairly favourable fixtures. I wouldn't imagine, with all due respect to a side like Yeovil or Braintree, that they're going to be up there or pulling up any trees this season. So this bank holiday weekend Woking and Southend is going to be a really good litmus test for Pools to see exactly where they're at. But there's certainly a renewed sense of optimism among Pools fans who believe that this is certainly a squad capable of challenging for the playoffs. And that is, I think, the bare minimum at Hartlepool United. Simon Grayson, the manager himself, has said anything other than a playoff challenge will be deemed a failure this season.
Yeah, and I guess when you look at the playoffs, I'm not sure at what point they kind of do the fixtures and the kind of calendar for it. But you mentioned kind of York last season when they crashed into the playoffs. Well, crashed out actually was probably more what I'm looking to say, because but the format was really weird, I think, because of maybe other events at Wembley, and the trophy final was kind of before the playoffs, and it kind of felt that the teams that got that was meant to be an advantage of being second and third were a little bit disadvantaged, because they kind of didn't play for such a long time, and then the teams that did play had a bit of a rest before they went into the extended format. So as a team that might be in there this season, I guess that's something you're going to be keeping an eye on, just kind of how that's going to work out, because it's so unique, that playoff format. I think talking to fans that are in the Football League that don't follow the National League, I think when they see that, they're like, this is crazy. But and largely it did kind of feel quite crazy, because someone like York going out so easily in the end kind of didn't really feel like it reflected the whole season.
Yeah, I think both York and Forest Green, who obviously finished second and third, came into it really undercooked. I think it was something like somewhere almost 3 weeks, wasn't it, between their last game of the regular season and their playoff semi-final. And then you look at the teams that beat them, Oldham and Southend, what they had was a bit of momentum because they'd already won through playoff quarterfinals. And I think that York and Forest Green had lost all the momentum that they built up over the season by having such a prolonged break. It was almost like a mini pre-season. That certainly didn't work in their favor, did it? I'm actually a fan of the format in general. I think it makes things interesting. I personally would really like to see a second automatic promotion place introduced. I know that there's that debate that it's like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas in terms of the Football League sides, but I think it's really important to foster healthy competition. You've only got to look at how well teams tend to do that go up from the National League into the Football League. I mean, there are some really obvious success stories. You look at Luton went from the National League to the Premier League in 10 years. Wrexham, of course, now competing in the Championship. Stockport, led by former Pools boss Dave Challoner, at the top end of League One. Notts County and Chesterfield as well finished in the playoffs in League Two. But even sides that you wouldn't necessarily expect to go and pull up any trees at the higher level, you look at someone like Bromley, how well they adapted. There's clearly not much of a gap, is there, between the two divisions? So I'd certainly like to see a second automatic promotion place introduced. But in terms of the format, I am a fan of it because I think it gives teams in mid-table a chance throughout most of the season to potentially put a run of wins together and sneak into one of those 6th or 7th places. It certainly keeps things interesting in that regard. But I think probably the fixture schedulers would look to reduce that gap between the quarterfinals and the semi-finals being played, because it did seem to be a bit of a disadvantage to York and Forest Green. Pools went through the playoffs only a few years ago in 2021. They finished 4th, so they had the advantage of a home quarterfinal, beat Bromley, then beat Stockport away. They had to ride their luck that day, it has to be said, and then beat Torquay in a really memorable playoff final. A lot of that good work has been undone. Obviously, Pools are back in the National League and they've been languishing in mid-table for the last couple of years. I would, of course, love for Pools to finish in the playoffs. I'm not sure that my heart could take it, though, because it is a really, really dramatic couple of weeks. I think there have been some fabulous National League playoffs, not just finals, but semi-finals as well. I remember when Grimsby beat Wrexham, I think it was 5-4 or 6-5, something ridiculous like that. So it throws up some really interesting results. In general, I'm a fan of the format, as I say, but I like that second automatic promotion place as well.
Yeah, it's a cruel mistress, because the one time we've qualified for it, I think the season finished on the Sunday and we were out on the Wednesday. It was like you've been building up, and then it's just like a click of the fingers and it's gone. Whereas in the Football League, obviously, at least you get 2 games, 2 legs, really, I guess, to fight that out. So yeah, it can be just very different. But well, there you go. If you win the league, then you don't have to worry about it. So that's something to do. Just looking at the calendar, the return fixture is at the start of January. So we will see, I guess, when we join the call. Then if you join us again, it'll be interesting to see if we're still down there, if we've kind of sorted ourselves out and moved up the table, and just how Hartlepool are going, because there seems to be always a lot of kind of stories and twists and turns along the way for you guys. So thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the game on Saturday. Maybe not too much, and then obviously the season after that as well. But thank you again for coming on, Robbie. It was great to get your insights.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to chat.